midnight on BBC One. Before that, it's Question Time with David Dimbleby.
On Question Time tonight in Bristol, Chief Secretary to the Treasury, William Waldegrave. Labour's Legal Affairs spokesman, Paul Boateng. Scientist and economic advisor to the Liberal Democrats, Margaret. And from the Chartered Institute of Housing, Christine Laird. Good evening and welcome to Question Time from Bristol, where our audience is ready as ever to challenge our panel about the main issues of the week and other things that may have occurred to them. We'll take the first question from Tim Collins, who is a PR consultant. Tim Collins.
Do you think that England's football team should be chosen from players' actions on the field alone?
This is in the light of the trouble on the Cathay Pacific airliner. Is it coming back from Hong Kong? Yes. Should the team be chosen from the players' actions on the field alone? Margaret Sharp.
Yes, I think the answer is that they should be chosen for their football. We badly need very good footballers, it seems to me. I think, however, that they should bear in mind that they do have a responsibility as a role model, particularly to our young people and our young men. We should bear in mind that the majority of crime in this country is committed by young men between 13 and 18, and it is that particular group that I think are very vulnerable to being led, if you like, led astray.
So why don't you punish them by removing them from the team if it's shown that they've behaved in a loutish way?
I think that they should be very firmly reprimanded at first, but I don't think that we should take them off the team immediately. I think conceivably if they go on behaving like that, then yes, they should be removed from the team, but certainly not immediately.
Paul Boateng.
Well, some of them play the fool on and off the football field. I mean, that is the reality. And quite frankly, those people who let the side down, literally, and to behave badly on an aeroplane is to let the side down. It lets your mates down who haven't behaved badly, and very many members of that team didn't. It lets the country down, who you represent. And that's important. And it does, in fact, set a bad example and creates a diversion, just as we're about to have a great festival of sport in the coming weeks. And the view that I take is that if you behave badly, if you let the side down, you should be kicked off the side.
Christine Laird. One off, one on so far.
I think if I'd been asked the question a couple of years ago, it would have been that, yes, people should be selected for their performance alone on the field. Now I'm not so sure, because increasingly Britain is getting a very poor reputation on and off the field for the way in which our sportsmen behave. And they are the role models for our children. So I do think that we have to take more punitive action. And the best form of action I can think of is to deprive them of that in which they seek to excel, which in Gazza's case is football.
Not that we know that it was Gazza's seat that was broken up, or Gazza's television sets that were broken up, because it hasn't been proven or indeed argued yet. Yes?
I'd like to pick up on something Margaret Sharp said, excuse me, that players shouldn't be penalised straight away. They're not kids. They know what they're doing. They're old enough to know better. They should be penalised straight away.
OK. And the man at the very back there.
Eric Cantona caused a lot of problems in his attack on a supporter.
And was suspended, didn't he?
Yes, and now he's been made a national hero, Footballer of the Year.
OK, and the man in the centre here?
Well, I think financial punishment doesn't mean anything to people like that, and I would agree that they need to be deprived of what they enjoy most in order to set an example, because society is getting more and more violent, and I think we need to make that point.
William Waldegrave.
Well, I agree with Paul and the others on this, and it seems to me too that there must be a relationship to their discipline as a team. I mean, I've never played sport at a very high level, but I never heard in the sports I was playing, rowing was my sport. If you had an eight where they were all drunk 2 days before the match of their the year, you know, that wasn't going to be a very successful 8. So I cannot believe that if those people didn't behave with a bit more discipline, they would also play better on the field.
But if I might say so, once you'd finished the 8s and you had boat night, you quite frequently counted the,
that is fair
the
enough.
cost in thousands.
If they win Euro 96, I don't mind if Gazza goes on a blind, as long as he doesn't break up somebody else's aeroplane.
But do you think the Football Association is taking it seriously enough, or being cavalier about it?
Well, they're in a difficult position, aren't they? Because they know that they'll be in terrible trouble if the British team doesn't do well. They've got players who are very able but don't behave frightfully well, so they're in a bind. But I do think that they would do better in the long term if they tried to re-establish some kind of real discipline. They'd do better, obviously, in the ways of providing an example that the other panellists have referred to, but I think you would get a little bit better play in the long term, too.
OK, the man in the front here.
Surely if any of us had been on a flight like that and committed damage to the tune of X £1,000s, we'd have probably been in police custody as soon as we got off the flight.
And no chance to play. And the man in the jacket, red jacket?
Surely the thing is that they get away with so much on the field nowadays. There's all these sleeky little tricks. They get away with so much of that it carries on into their civil life.
And we're going into this festival of football in which people are worried about the levels of crowd violence, Germans meeting the English fans and that sort of thing.
They're egged on by the players, shirt pulling, tripping, kicking, elbowing.
No woman has spoken on this subject as far as... Yes, on the left there.
Yes, it is ironic that the police have been trying to preempt this soccer hooliganism by cracking down on the bad behaviour prior to Euro 96. And isn't it ironic that the very players in the team are actually preempting this by putting in their bad behaviour? I mean, what sort of example is it setting to everybody?
Football fans in Newcastle have their photographs splattered all over the newspapers.
Yes.
The trouble is that it also started in tennis, didn't it? If you think back to tennis, I mean, in my lifetime, the tennis players were extremely well mannered and would sometimes call the ball, say that the ball was out when it, you know, to the advantage of the other player or whatever it was. Now, because it started really with Nastasi, didn't it? They became actually a selling point that they behaved so badly, and they got their fans for that, and the television would you know, amplify each occasion when somebody argued with the umpire and all the rest of it. And the trouble is, it became part of the commercial selling point for the sport.
But the fans don't beat each other up,
that must mean that people actually like watching the aggro a bit, and that is very depressing.
But the All English Lawn Tennis Club is not exactly full of fans throwing cushions at each other.
No.
Or worse.
I think they'd have coronaries if they did.
Strawberries at each other. Let's just take a vote on this. Do you think that if we have to be a bit careful here, do you think that if the people who did the damage on the plane, apparently drunk, were identified, they should be banned from the team, or should they should be allowed to play? If you think they should be banned, say yes. Oh, very high. Over three quarters of you think that they should be banned, and only 21% say no. Let's go on to another question. It comes from Linda Fenton, who is a student. Linda Fenton.
As the government proposes to provide 55 new paediatric intensive care beds without further funding, which services should be cut to create these beds?
Christine Laird.
You would come to me first. I don't think it's realistic to set targets to provide additional beds without providing additional funding. One of the concerns that I have is that increasingly our expectations on our social services and social policy areas go up and up and up. But funding into social policy areas goes down. And that is unrealistic. If we want better healthcare, better education and so forth, we ought to recognise that we need to pay for it. So I do think it is inappropriate to say that the health service must find an additional 55 paediatric beds, but that it is down to them to find the additional resources. Because the reality is that the health trust managers are faced with an impossible choice. Whatever they cut, somebody is going to lose out, and I don't think that that's acceptable. So I'm sorry I'm not answering your question, but my view is I don't think it's appropriate to actually make a decision to cut health services. I think we should find more money.
Okay. William Waldegrave, the question is which services should be cut to create these new intensive care beds?
Well, the first thing is that and it's the one service for which a Chief Secretary can say this with certainty, there will be more money, because the health service spending is one of the programs that goes up in real terms every year, and has done for 20 years or so. There was only one year in which it was actually cut in real terms, and I will forbear to mention under which government that took place, so that it wasn't mine. The truth is that you are quite right, that expectations and demands go faster all the time, partly because of the skill and the success of the scientists in finding new ways of spending money and new ways of curing people, but they're often expensive ways of curing people. But I do not think it impossible, out of the slowly but surely expanding funds for health, to find this relatively small number of, I know, expensive items. They cost about £250,000 each, I think, intensive care paediatric beds. But I think that that is, over the next 2 or 3 years, which is what Stephen Dorrell was talking about, it is practical to slightly shift the priorities to make sure that that absolutely core priority is met a little bit better. It's met very well now.
But yes, Linda Fenton.
Where would the money come from?
Well, the money will come from you.
You said it would, no, you said it would move. You'd shift the priorities to intensive care. So where from? That was the question.
Well, there will be increased overall spending. And if the easy thing to say, the popular thing to say, is of course that if you have to find money in the short term, find it out of bureaucracy. There is always money to find out of bureaucracy. But you have, and this is the real question for all societies in the next decades, you have actually to start saying to health services, what are the really key and core things that we should be doing? And there may be things further down the list of priorities which are less important for health services to be doing at public expense, in order to make sure that they're doing the absolutely central things like that.
But Linda Fenton's point is that the money is already allocated. This is a new demand that's been put on by Stephen Dorrell.
Over 2 or 3 years, yeah.
Are you happy with the answer?
No, I'm not. I don't think he's answered the question at all. Well, surely the increasing funds that you're giving are to existing services and the increasing demands there. This is a completely new service costing £14 million, and you're not giving it any money.
It isn't a completely new service. I mean, it's
completely new beds, isn't it?
It's expanding one of the core services that exists at the moment. And I mean, there are services that are expanding all the time within the health service. I mean, whole new things appear, which have to be, whole new kinds of drug treatment have to be bought each year, which didn't exist the year before. And the health service manages, and it's always battling against resource constraints, because of course the demands increase faster than the resources can ever increase under any government. But it really isn't impossible to say, against an increasing budget, one of the only budgets that is absolutely secure in getting real inflation-proofed increases in funding every year, it isn't impossible to find another 14 million. They have about 36 billion to spend.
Do you agree with that, Paul Boateng?
Well, one thing's certain, Stephen Dorrell won't be Secretary of State for Health in 2 or 3 years' time. And the best way and the most important thing to cut is the lifetime of this government. Because the reality is that we are losing something in the region of 8,500 National Health Service beds a year under this government. The reality is that people are having to wait longer and longer for their operations. People are dying because they can't get into hospitals. And it's all very well for William Waldegrave to talk as he does about bureaucracy. Yes, there are always savings that can be made there. Who created the bureaucracy in the first place? It's the crazy NHS reforms that put the emphasis on accountants and managers rather than on doctors and nurses, where the priority ought to be. Let's have more doctors, more nurses, more ancillary workers, and less accountants doing the government's bidding.
Are you... Is that a promise of more spending by Labour on the National Health Service?
It is a promise. It is a promise in clear and unequivocal terms that we will end the internal market in the NHS, because it is disgracefully wasteful. And the sooner we get back in the NHS to cooperation and not competition, the better it will be. The NHS is not Woolworths.
All right. The man at the very back there with the hand up with spectacles.
Instead of tax cuts, wouldn't people rather pay to have nurses, teachers and policemen on the beat?
Well, I want to bring Margaret Sharpler. I'll come to you. Can we hold that? And we'll ask Mr. Waldegrave that in a moment. Perhaps you could answer.
Well, I think that there's no doubt that in Britain we are spending less than in any other advanced industrial country on the health service. And what we get from the National Health Service is very good value for money. Equally, over the course of the last few years, as Paul has mentioned, the introduction of the internal market has meant very expensive, what economists call transactions costs, which are internalised now within the NHS itself. So you're paying for these negotiations. 22,000 extra administrators have been brought in. It's been a very expensive operation. I don't think, as Paul suggests, that we can actually undo it immediately anyhow, because I think the health service has been shaken up enough at the moment, and we want a period of calm, and we want a period in which we can actually size things up. This means that, to my mind, we have got to put more resources into the health service. The demands on it are increasing. We certainly need these extra paediatric beds, but they have got to be paid for, and the government should be putting the money into there.
So higher taxes?
So it would mean a slightly higher taxes in order to pay for more health services.
As well as for education, which you've already said you'll put money on.
Well, I think that there are other ways of shuffling resources within the government.
All right, let me bring your question back again then to Mr. Waldegrave. Could you just repeat what you said?
Instead of tax cuts, wouldn't people rather pay and have good nurses, good doctors, teachers and policemen that they can see?
Well, we do have good doctors and good nurses and good policemen and good teachers.
But we don't have enough of them.
More, he means.
People want both, don't they? Because it is perfectly clear that people were extremely disgruntled when taxes went up after the last election, as they had to during the recession, and they voted for governments in the 80s, and Mr. Blair clearly thinks that they won't vote for governments in the 90s that are promising to put taxes up. So Mr. Blair of the Labour Party has come to the conclusion, because he has an absolutely adamantine control over any spending promises for his people, because he knows that if he promises large tax cuts, as John Smith did, he won't get elected. So he must take the view that he doesn't want to have tax increases. Now, I think there is also an international dimension to this. If you look at the countries that are doing best in terms of creating jobs, and Britain is now one of those, the Americans, the New Zealanders, the Australians, the Swiss, the Japanese, are all those that spend towards the bottom of the ranking in terms of the total government spend. We spend about 42%. Americans a great deal less, New Zealanders less, Australians less, Japanese, Swiss less. And all those countries are at the top of the pile in job creation. This is the balance that has to be struck. Of course, you have to maintain the great services, and we're doing that, but you have to keep taxes down, because otherwise the jobs and the investment go elsewhere.
OK, the man in the blue shirt there.
I'd like to say the Conservatives have taught me some very important things through the years. One of the things being that if you can't afford something, don't have it. And I don't think we can afford your government anymore.
OK. You sit at the back there, yes.
I believe that there are far too many professional managers in the health service. It's all right putting money into a health service, but that money is not getting to the sharp end, because the professionals in the health service have got very little control of how that money's been spent.
Christine Laird, do you agree with that?
I think there are more cost-effective ways of achieving the government's objectives to create an internal market within the health service than the way in which they have gone about it. There is no doubt that the number of administrators that the National Health Service employs now is considerably greater than it was 10 years ago. And I think it's perfectly possible to specify performance targets in a whole range of areas and actually achieve those by effective monitoring without necessarily going through the bureaucratic jungle that we're tending to create.
Paul Boateng, what do you say to the point the man made at the back, that we actually would prefer to spend more in taxation in order to get these services, implicitly the NHS included?
I say
you in favour of that?
No, I say that the British people are already taxed too much. The reality is that William Waldegrave and his party, having told the electorate that they were going to cut taxes, have in fact since 1993, April 1993, put up taxes 22 times. The average British family is paying now an additional £670 a year in taxation. Unless you are earning over £64,000 a year, your tax has gone up under this lot over the last 17 years.
But he's saying that he'd like it to go up more.
Well,
that's the point that was being made to you.
So there is no room for further tax
Well,
increases.
he says there is.
The
man at the back there at the top. I mean, you're saying the same as Mr. Waldegrave said.
No, I'm not saying
no money on taxes.
I'm saying that
he's saying we want money spent on these things, more of it.
Well, I hear what he says, but I have to tell him the overwhelming majority of people feel, and correctly so, that they are paying too much tax. And what we have to do, and what William Waldegrave's government for the rest of the remaining months of its life has to do, is to heed the words of the Audit Commission. Their audit commission, they reported only a matter of weeks ago, and that is that the internal market is costing too much, that it hasn't, in fact, provided the sort of improvements at the hospital bedside to the patient, in patient care, that were promised by it. He must even now be prepared. And just, William, for once, be prepared to change your mind in a way that will actually benefit the British people. Change your policy on health and start putting money where it counts into primary health care and into the hospitals.
Let's just move off this. Let me just test your own opinion on this question. Would you like to see taxes increased to pay for the National Health Service, to pay more for the National Health Service, along the lines that we've discussed here, the intensive beds for children and that? Would you like to see taxes increased to pay for it? Just push the button as yes or no. And we'll see how closely you align with the Labour and Conservative representatives here. Not very closely. 59% say they would like taxes increased, and 35% say no. We'll go on to another question. Tim Cooksley, another student. Tim Cooksley.
Will Jacques Santer prove to be the unlikely saviour of Britain's sovereignty?
This is, you think we'll pull out of Europe because of what he said today about holding Europe hostage?
Might well do.
That's your view. Margaret Sharp.
I hope not. I think we've got ourselves into a very dangerous situation at the moment. I think that John Major has embarked on a course without really thinking about where he's going to end up on this particular course. A trade war, which is what he's actually started, is, I think, an extremely dangerous thing to start like this. And we've already seen the tit-for-tat that's coming from that. It is madness, absolute madness, to think that we can pull out of Europe. There are far too many jobs that are concerned with this. If you think about all the jobs, you think about 57% of our trade comes from Europe. There is, we are now tied in, the whole economy is now interwoven with Europe. And what is more, every other country in Europe is part of this greater European Union as it is now, with the exception of Switzerland and Sweden. And we're going to be bringing in the countries of Eastern Europe within the next 2 or 3 years, probably, to form this greater union. That we should want to opt out at this particular moment in time is, I think, totally absurd. Now, we brought this upon ourselves, this BSE crisis. It was handled from the start, from 1989, extraordinarily badly by this government. We should have recognised that there was a public health risk in BSE, and we should have taken the necessary precautions as a public health risk. Now we have confronted ourselves with a situation in which things have gone really from bad to worse over the whole issue. How do we get out of it?
But the question is whether Jacques Santer's actions were justified, or whether they will make things even worse, when he talked about us unjustifiably taking hostages in Europe by our actions, by the government's actions.
Well, as I've indicated, I think that basically he's totally justified in terms of what he's doing, because I think we have provoked him to this over the course of many years.
So the tat is a proper response to the tit, so to speak?
I think it's a natural response to the tit. I think particularly since the tit, if I might say so, has been going on for a very long period of time,
okay.
and I think things run out. But I would also say that, I mean, as Churchill said, jaw is better than war, and we quite frankly ought to be talking about this, and I gather that next week we shall be going back to the soft line and talking about
Boateng.
Well, the tit's John Major. That's the reality. He's handled this matter badly from the very beginning. But I have to say, I don't think Jacques Santer has helped matters very much. What we need to be doing now is to be cooling this.
But I thought Labour supported John Major on this.
What we need to be doing is cooling it. What we need to be doing is recognising where the national interest lies. And that's why we are hoping and we are working for a cross-party unanimity on the issue of the negotiations surrounding the beef crisis, because we've got to recognize two things have to be done. First of all, we do have to get the ban lifted. That's important. But also, and importantly, and this is where John Major and his government have failed, we need to address the causes of the crisis in the first place. And the crisis wasn't caused in Brussels. It wasn't caused in Strasbourg. It was caused right here in terms of our own farming practices, in terms of the failure of MAF and the Department of Health and this government to handle the crisis properly. And what we've got to do is to restore faith in British beef. Okay. Because unless we do that, it's no use removing the ban, because the Germans won't buy their own beef, let alone ours. And we ourselves are not buying our own beef. So let's actually get back to where it all began, the failures of government policy in relation to the whole issue of food and food safety.
Well, let's for a moment get back to Jacques Santerre. Tim Cooksley, who asked the question, what's your view of this and the answers you've heard?
I think Paul Boateng's rather dodged the issue again, because he's not directly dealt with the issue of Europe, he's dealt with the issue of British beef, which was not directly the question. My question was directly aimed at the future of Britain and Europe, not over British beef.
About the effects of this crisis on Britain's future in Europe and the reactions been provoked.
Let me address that, because I think that too is a very important question.
Well, not at too great length,
no,
if you would.
But it was, Geoffrey Howe who said that what had happened to British foreign policy under his former colleagues was that we had gone into an area of self-delusion, because we delude ourselves if we believe that our place isn't in Europe competing successfully, getting the most out of it, and above all making sure that we are in there doing the business, building British jobs and British economic prosperity. And we don't do that by putting the barricades up against the rest of Europe.
Christine Laird.
I think we ought to remember that traditionally Jacques Santerre has been an ally of Britain, and therefore to act in the way that he has done must indicate that there is something seriously amiss in our relationship with the rest of Europe. We are in Europe whether we like it or not. The difference is that we're not playing the European game. If you actually look at the way in which other countries operate within Europe, it's very clear to me, if you look at Ireland, for example, that they have understood how Europe operates and they're making it work for them. I don't think that we do. I do actually think that a number of issues have arisen in the last few years that could have been avoided if we had actually looked at our role in Europe. If you take the issue of British beef, and I'm sorry to get back to that, the European Parliament were furious that it was the announcements in terms of the linkages between BSC and CJD were announced in Parliament without any warning to them. And suddenly they were faced with calls for compensation for British farmers. They were put on the spot. Now, other countries would have played their hand differently. And I do think that we need to think about how we operate in Europe.
Okay, the man in the front there.
Isn't what Jacques Santerre recently said just another example of how much our European partners dislike us over here?
Well, William Waldegrave, do you want to answer that?
Well, there's so... I mustn't comment on all these things, but I just will comment on that last point. So the British minister is supposed not to tell Parliament first, but to go and tell some bureaucrats in Brussels first. That's, I'm happy to say, not how British parliamentarians behave.
But can we come to the nub of the issue?
The real nub of the issue is whether we're now finding issues which so grate on us in terms of our own independence and our own sovereignty that Europe is impossible for us. I think that's what lies behind the question. Well, I think the jury is still out on that. It is not madness to say we could be outside Europe. Of course, Britain could be outside the European Union if it wanted to be. It is greatly to its interests that it should be in the European Union if it's the right kind of European Union. If it's the European Union that was put before this country at the referendum time, and I remember that referendum very well, all the parties, all the people, Roy Jenkins and Ted Heath and Jeremy Thorpe, who were the principal leaders, all argued that we were going into a Europe of nations, where our sovereignty, there might be a little pooling of sovereignty, sensibly, where there were things we wanted to do together, but the ultimate sovereignty would lie with the nation states and with the democratic parliaments. That was what was put to Britain. Now, I believe that that Europe can still exist. There are many in France who still believe in that Europe. There are actually rather more in Germany than you might think, and there are plenty of people in Britain, including me, who think like that. If, however, down the line, it became clear that there was an overwhelming consensus within the other countries of the present European Union that they wanted to go for a full liberal democrat federalism, well, then I think Britain is going to stand aside from that, because I don't think we want that. We certainly never voted for it.
No, but
and I don't think that's yet proven. I don't think that we're yet at that point.
But
and certainly this beef issue, which we debated last week and we don't want to debate again, isn't that.
No,
Because
but
that's an issue of the single market.
Come back to the question, which was that did you expect the reaction to the policy which your government, and you sat at the cabinet table when it was decided, took in terms of Europe? Did you expect the hostility that's now apparently coming back from Europe, from Jacques Santer, with the fishing policy today, the argument about milk, the whole raft of
entirely
things?
standard. I've sat in entirely standard form. I've sat in European community meetings more times than I care to remember, where, for example, the Spanish held the whole community to hostage because they wouldn't let in any of the Scandinavians. It was, it's actually Sweden is in the community. It's Norway that's outside. They wouldn't let any of them in until they got an even better deal on fishing. We had a whole long period where the Germans, before Maastricht, just held the whole thing up for a year because they wanted it after their election. This is how, I'm afraid, this is in a way one of the dispiriting parts of the thing. We are now beginning to play the game like the others in Europe play it.
Okay, the man at the very back.
What do we expect, really? Because we're treating the Europeans as if they're John Gummer's children, shoving beef down their throats.
Or trying to.
No, we're not doing that. We're saying that they should accept the advice of the World Health Organization, of the International Vets Organizations, and of the science, and shouldn't, for example, seek to play their own internal commercial politics with that, because that is against the rules of the game, and while they play it like that, we'll be tough.
Okay, the man in the waistcoat on the left there.
It seems that once again John Major's milking the situation at the expense of the nation just to try and get our backing and our votes.
No, I don't think it's that at all.
I mean, I think the problem is for John Major that Jacques Santer was his own chosen candidate. Do you remember all the fuss about who was going to be acceptable as president of the commission? John Major told us that Santer was a man he could do business with, so we had Santer. And now the position is, because John Major's got problems with his own Tory Eurosceptic fundamentalist right, as opposed to William and his Euro-friendly left, we're all over the place. The important thing, it seems to me, is that we should not play party politics with Europe, but that we should recognize where Britain's interest lies. Britain's interest lies in doing something about the Brussels bureaucracy. We need to do something about that. The way we do that is to strengthen our own parliamentary accountability in relation to Brussels and to strengthen the role of the European Parliament. And we should be having that debate, not trying to win an election on the back of xenophobia and whipping up a sort of Dunkirk spirit.
So how is your shadow foreign secretary supporting the British government in these actions? If you describe them as whipping up xenophobia?
No, because Robin Cook is trying and doing his very best to make this government recognise that the national interest must come first. That's why he has offered Rifkin, he's offered John Major an opportunity to develop a bipartisan approach. We reject xenophobia. We do believe Britain's role lies in a strong Europe and fighting our corner in that Europe.
Okay, briefly, Margaret Sharp and then Christine.
Well, I must say I've never heard anything more mealy-mouthed than Robin Cook's exposition on the Today programme the other day. I think that the issue here is one that John Major is playing to his right wing, he's playing to the Eurosceptics. He's in a very precarious situation. I think Paul is quite right. We should stop playing politics with this one. We should treat our European partners with the respect with which they're due. Yes, we should. We should all. Europe isn't wholly perfect. There are certainly things we want to change. The fisheries policy is one, but equally, and we should on occasions be tough. But it is much better, as I said, basically the jaw rather than war.
Christina.
There's a time for tit-for-tat politics, and I honestly don't think that it's now. I mean, the point about informing our Parliament first is nonsensical. The reality is that we operate within two parliaments, not one. What is so difficult about simultaneous briefings? Well, the second point I'd like to make is that If we had tackled the beef issue and various other issues properly and effectively 6 years ago, this would not have arisen. And we have to, you actually have to be sensible in terms of one's approach. Spain was potentially an ally in the beef crisis. What have we done? We have alienated them because we vetoed the trade arrangements that affected Mexico, where they were hoping to move into Mexico. And I think we need to play Europe more effectively than we do.
OK, fine. I'm going to move on to another question. Sorry to those of you who've got your hands up. Let's go on to another question. This comes from Eric Dane, who describes himself as a henpecked husband.
If I come home drunk every Saturday night, is my wife entitled to murder me?
Paul Boateng.
Domestic violence is a very serious matter. The reality is that there are women who every night in this country, particularly on Friday nights and Saturday nights, go to bed with black eyes, because the reality is domestic violence is widespread. And there are very many more battered wives than there are henpecked husbands. And it is a law and order problem. And it's one in which we need to take strong action. We need to make it clear that we will not tolerate women being battered. Zero tolerance. Up and down the country, there are first-rate initiatives by local authorities and the police actually working out practical, sensible arrangements by which domestic violence units are established, domestic violence is taken seriously, and men learn to treat women with respect. And that has to be done before we even begin to look at the extreme cases that Sarah Thornton's represents, in terms of actual death resulting from a pattern over many, many years of protracted and serious violence against a woman.
You're the legal affairs spokesman for the Labour Party, and I suppose the question that springs from this is Sarah Thornton was acquitted of murder but found guilty of manslaughter,
yes.
but not because of the assaults on her by her husband, which were agreed, but because the judge said of her abnormality of mind. Now,
yes.
Some people argue the law should be changed, and that if a wife is battered in this way, that in some way it mitigates the action that follows.
Well, we've got a very real problem, because the law has developed over the years, the common law has developed over the years in this area, very much to reflect the interests, first and foremost, of men who fight, and indeed men with swords who fight. I mean, that's where the law's at. In terms of the law, say, of self-defense, it was formed at a time when men fought with swords. So there is a requirement that only reasonable force be used, and indeed a requirement that that force not be excessive. If you look at the law in relation to provocation, it requires there, if you are to establish manslaughter as opposed to murder, that there's a sudden temporary loss of control. Now, the law as it currently is constituted just doesn't deal with the needs of battered women. And I think we have to look at the law again. Men must learn to treat women with respect.
Okay. Eric Dane, who asked the question.
I quite agree one should consider battered women, but I don't want women in general, and my wife in particular, to find any useful models that she can justifiably use for taking any drastic action herself. And so I think one's going to, I want to defend the male side as well as the female.
Margaret Sharp.
Well, I think your question was, am I entitled to be murdered? And the answer is, of course, not. Equally, I'm not sure you are entitled to come home regularly drunk and abuse your wife, which is the point that Paul was making here. I think that what Paul was saying about the seriousness of battered wives and abuse to women in this way is very real. I don't think at the moment the law does cover this issue satisfactorily. She was originally she was originally accused of murder and jailed for murder, and the appeal has been on this whole question of provocation and her state of mind at the time. And now I think she has the right judgment for what what happened in the particular
Which
case.
wasn't manslaughter by provocation.
Which wasn't manslaughter by provocation. It was manslaughter because of her state of mind.
Yes.
But I think, in a sense, that, you know, the law is not right here. Paul is quite right that the law needs to be changed.
Okay, the woman in the front.
I just wanted to say that I wanted to come back to that point Paul Boateng made on law and order. It is a law and order point. I think we're an inhumane and an uncivilised society if we deal with violence in the workplace or on the street or on a football ground, but we allow it to go unchallenged in the home, and I find that very, very distressing.
Yes, you said it.
No,
The man behind you.
surely we should be looking for a zero tolerance against violence, full stop. Not particularly focus it on women or men, but the end to violence, and then maybe we need to check out a whole series of other issues.
So what would your own reaction be to somebody who murders their husband because the husband has been violent?
The grounds for this change to manslaughter was about, at that particular moment in time, she'd lost any control that might have stopped her from killing her. And at that point, what else can you say but manslaughter? If she had planned the whole thing and it'd been months in preparation, then it would be murder, and it's about trying to find that balance somewhere.
And the man in front of you who wants to speak.
Isn't there a problem with the fact that the murder carries a mandatory life sentence, and there is no discretion allowed?
Yes.
And I think that was the complication in this case.
Yes. William Waldegrave, what do you think?
Well, I agree with all the things that have been said about bringing the law up to date in relation to types of crime that weren't recognised, I guess, when a lot of the present common law was established. And that's really a different issue. That should certainly be done, and I think is being slowly done. The answer to the question must be no, however. But I am in a certain difficulty with this, because I know Eric Dane. Anybody less likely to come home drunk on a Saturday night and beat his wife is hard to imagine.
Okay. Christine Laird.
I think my advice would be, is if you go home drunk every Saturday night to your wife, would be to leave you. It seems a more effective solution than attempting to murder you. And that means having effective support systems in place for battered spouses, whether female or male. I understand females battering males is becoming something of an epidemic in America. But on the wider issue, I agree we should have zero tolerance for violence, but we also need to reform the way in which we deal with violent crimes. It does seem to me inappropriate that Sarah Thornton was sent to prison on a murder count, when clearly her circumstances were unusual. And I do think that the jury delivered the correct verdict today. And as she herself said on the news, she took away a life, therefore she deserved to go to prison. What was at issue was the length of her sentence, not that she was sent to prison.
What do you mean when you say we should have zero tolerance of violence? I mean, how do you have a zero tolerance of violence?
I think we ought to make it very clear in terms of how we conduct our society and how we structure our society that violence is not acceptable. And that comes down to, for example, the issue that we discussed earlier about disruptive behaviour on an aeroplane. Today's thug is potentially tomorrow's murderer. So I do think that we ought to have very clearly stated policies that we will not tolerate antisocial, offensive or violent behaviour, and we should come down tough very quickly and very firmly.
So you're with the Home Secretary on his proposals?
Yes, I am. If you actually look at the New York experiment, it works.
This is, just to explain, this is where you, if they're a graffiti, you take them away. If the pane of glass is broken, you mend it, because then you reduce the expectation that life is squalid.
Very much so. I mean, up until 18 months ago, I used to manage large council housing estates on a large inner city. And I have to say that if you go in tough on issues like neighbour nuisance and graffiti, if as soon as a window pane is broken, you go in and repair it, if at the first complaint of noise nuisance you come down on that household like a ton of bricks, it sends out a very clear message, and you can actually reduce antisocial behaviour on that basis. If you tolerate it initially, you send out a message that it's acceptable.
The woman in the middle here.
Do you not feel that the images of violence in the media and on television are making it more acceptable?
Who would like to answer that one?
Me.
William.
Well, I can't help thinking you must be right. I mean, we're a liberal society, we're a free society, we all abhor censorship, but it must just lower people's threshold of what they think is normal. If every time a child switches on the television somebody's being blown to pieces or tortured or attacked in some way, it just makes things normal. And I know the old liberal establishment always argued that it's not imitative and it never affects anybody and so. Well, I think I just can't believe that's true. If you watch your own children, they do begin to take some idea of what normality is from what they see on the television and what's around them.
Man in the third row there.
Hello, yeah. I think you need to get the support mechanisms working within the court systems as well. These people commit the offences and then take months to get to court. They should be there within the day or the next day. The magistrate court system needs to be opened up later in the night so they're brought before as they are when the police deal with them.
So it's instant justice.
Yes.
And the woman over here on the right.
Well, domestic violence has been here for a very long time and well before the television brought violence to our screens.
Paul Boateng.
Yes, I wouldn't blame domestic violence on the television, but I do think, however, there is a point to be made about the images of violence, because the images of violence, in fact, do not tell the real story, because all the violence you see on television is sanitized. When actually somebody is beaten up, it's very messy, it's very ugly, and it's very noisy in a squelchy sort of way. And you don't get that on television. You get a totally sanitized, clean-cut violence. Violence isn't like that. It's ugly, it's dirty, and we need to say no to it. But I do agree wholeheartedly with the questioner who talked about the need for speeding up the court process. We do need to have, particularly in the magistrates' court, fast-track, summary justice. It was always supposed to be giving that. And we need to be able to intervene much quicker, which is why Jack Straw's proposals are absolutely right, in terms of neighbourhood disputes and antisocial behaviour between neighbours. That's got to be stamped out, and I use that word advisedly. We've got to say, as a society, enough is enough. No more antisocial behaviour.
Back to the Home Secretary, it's all very well him getting tough on punishment, but I don't feel that he's really addressing the causes of crime and violence.
Right. Yes.
Yes, I mean, coming back to this general issue of violence in society, I think it's very important that we try to stamp it out as an earlier point as possible. And picking up the point that you're making there, I mean, if you look at the schools, it's very important we don't allow violence in the schools, and that when there is, that there are support mechanisms for the heads to deal with it. Yeah. One of the things that this means is that there are, within the schools or within the local education authority, support units where the children who come from disturbed homes, who are often the violent ones, it's because in many senses they're reaching out desperately, trying to bring attention to themselves, and they need somebody who can give them a bit of time and make them feel that they have got something to give to society, and to bring that out, as well as being quite clear that they have gone over what is morally acceptable within society.
Okay, let's move on to a question which maybe springs from that. Barnaby Smith, a student again, our third student tonight. Full of students, Bristol. Yes.
Okay. Do you think that David Blunkett's call to return to traditional teaching methods is a plot to out-Tory the Tories on education?
This was David Blunkett's speech, saying that we shouldn't be following the latest fashions in education. People said it was the kind of speech that they wouldn't have made 5 years ago. William Waldegrave.
Well, we've had Paul this evening trying to out-Tory me by saying we should actually cut taxes. I was just thinking we should try and hold them down as much as possible. You have Mr. Cook wanting to support us on beef, very welcome. We've had Jack Straw chasing the criminals. Now we've got David Blunkett saying back to basics. I think that I think the key will be. I think the key thing to watch is going to be whether they sing Land of Hope and Glory at their conferences.
You know, there will be more reason to sing of a land of hope and a land of some glory under Labour than there ever was under his party. That's the reality. So don't you So don't you, William Waldegrave, try and wrap yourself in the flag on this issue. The reality is, and you make the point about there being a number of students in the audience. Well, I was a student in Bristol only a few years ago. Well, almost 20 years ago. And the reality was that I was a student in Bristol because I went to a school in Hemel Hempstead, an ordinary grammar school in the heart of a council estate in that town, where they did put an emphasis on discipline, where they did put an emphasis on reading, writing, and arithmetic, where they did try and seek to impart a sense of values and a sense of worth in the children, and we do need to return to that sort of ethos. It doesn't have to be associated with grammar schools and secondary moderns. It ought to be associated with good education for all children.
All right. Are you, Margaret Sharp, do you think they're out-Torying the Tories on education?
Yes, I do.
And are they right? Are they right to?
I think that on this particular issue, there is a certain amount of rightness in it. What I would say is that any good teacher actually uses the methods that produce the results. And whether it's what are called the discovery methods, if you like, children feeling their own way along it, the look and say, or whether it's the traditional phonics for reading and the 3 R's and so forth, a teacher will play between all of these things according to the children that she's got in, he or she have got in the class. And I think it's very important to recognize that and to actually to recognize that teachers are professionals.
But sorry, I don't want to interrupt you. Well, I do want to interrupt you.
Yeah.
In what sense, since you say that, in what sense is David Blunkett out-Torying the Tories? Because he seems to be saying exactly what you're saying.
Well, I think...
Unless you also are out-Torying the Tories on this.
No, I think he's trying... No, because he's basically, in what he was saying today, saying very firmly, we've got to come back to the 3 R's. Also, earlier on, I mean, the Labour Party are now talking about coming back to grammar schools. In all of this, in their education policy, they're trying to out-Tory the Tory.
Right.
We're not... We in the Liberal Democrats do not want to go in that direction.
All right, I'll come back to you, Paul Boateng, so I can see you want to come in again. But the woman, yes, you in the spectacles.
Mr. Boateng, you were saying that you were a student in Bristol.
Yeah.
Bearing in mind that you were a student, obviously lots of people here are, and indeed were students, you must find it extraordinary that the Labour Party have adopted the Conservatives' policy on student loans.
Well, actually, I don't find it extraordinary that we as a country ought to be having a debate at a time in which we have an ageing population, at a time in which we also have a student population, a youth population that is lagging behind the rest of Europe in terms of skills and training, as to how we can afford it. There's a serious issue here for serious debate and serious politicians. And the answer that somehow the way forward is always simply to throw money at it and to raise taxes seems to me to be an error. But what I do find enormously depressing about this debate is the notion that somehow education and ideology go hand in hand. There's no such thing as a Tory education or a Labour education or even, saving your pardon, a Lib Democrat education. It doesn't exist.
Never has existed.
There is good education and there is bad education.
Right.
Now, we may have a disagreement amongst the parties about how to pay for it. We may have a disagreement about structures, but surely we can all agree about content. And the content of a good education is based on an understanding of the basics. It is based on discipline. It is based on hard work.
All right.
All the parties ought to
Laird.
be capable of accepting that.
Christine Laird.
I have to say I don't actually care whether or not David Blunkett is out-Torying the Tories. What I am really pleased about is that there appears to be a political consensus that we need to review our education strategy, and that we have perhaps got it wrong and need to revisit some of our traditional teaching methods. Because as an employer, I have to say I find it very worrying when I'm having to seriously think about teaching bright employees basic skills like spelling and the rudiments of grammar.
Madam Secretary.
I'm always concerned about the naivety with which this discussion is held. Teaching methods are tools. If you're a carpenter, you would use different tools for different purposes. The same thing applies for teaching. If you want to teach facts, it's a totally different kind of tool you need to use, a different teaching method than if you want people to think. And indeed, you need different teaching methods for different kinds of thought. Something I don't agree with Paul Boateng that we agree about the curriculum. It seems to me that the education of emotions, as one of the speakers was saying in answer to the last question, is vitally important. You can teach reading later. If you get somebody emotionally hung up, you've got them bad for life.
But are you a teacher yourself?
Yes, and indeed I've researched into teaching methods.
Fine, but are you surprised to hear David Blunkett? That was what was behind this question. Do you detect in Labour a new attitude to teaching from what they had in the past?
Yes, I was very disappointed with his comment and his idea that we've all got to get all 11-year-olds up to the average level of reading, but is obviously a nonsense.
But
I mean,
of course
we must have a distribution.
There's not
of
a single parent here who wouldn't be desperately concerned if their 11-year-old didn't have the reading age of an 11-year-old. The fact of the matter is that almost half of our 11-year-olds have got a reading age and a numeracy age that is less than 11. That's simply not good enough,
okay,
and Labour's saying so.
A point from you, and then we must move quickly on to come at the end.
Our society is growing up with children who can't read, who can't write, and who can't spell, and people are going to jobs with not their favourite skills, and that needs to be dealt with.
Well, I just think it's extraordinary. I think I know that most of the Labour people don't really believe any of this at all, but isn't it interesting that as far as the Labour leadership are concerned, they must have judged that the Tories have won the argument on tax, on education, on student loans, on relation to Europe. It seems to me rather odd.
Then why have you lost every by-election for the past 4 years?
All right. We've got about a minute left before we stop. Let me just take one last question from Richard Gilpin, who is a financial advisor. Mr. Gilpin.
Was the Provost of Birmingham right to amend the national anthem to meet the needs of a minority group?
Well, for those not in the know, they changed. I've never known anybody sing the fourth verse of the national anthem, but anyway, apparently in Birmingham they do sing the fourth verse of the national anthem, and he was changing it to that all the words "that men should brothers be" to "that all should united be." It should go, "Lord, make the nations see that men should brothers be and form one family the wide world over," and those are the words that he changed. Sorry to go on so long about that, but what do you think about it, Margaret Sharp?
On the whole, I didn't think that it was worth changing it, but it was, I mean, I don't actually think it even scans properly the way that he did it. It led me actually to look at the national anthem in preparation for this programme, because I thought we might have this question. And
now people will think you know the questions in advance,
which you strike me that the second verse would be rather good for the Eurosceptics. It talks about scattering our enemies and make them fall, confound their politics, frustrate their knavish tricks. Now that strikes me, as I say, as being really rather good for the Eurosceptics.
Okay, William Waldegrave, are you in favour of amending it because it offends people, the national anthem?
Well, did he change the knavish tricks?
No, he didn't. He left all that.
That's a bit sexist too. No, I'm not in favour. I think it's silly. Everybody knows that it doesn't mean just that males have got to be nice to each other. It means the human race has got to be nice to each other. I think it brings into disrepute a fundamentally good cause, which is to try and further the equality of the sexes, if you would go in for this kind of nonsense.
What's Labour policy on this? Briefly.
I think...
To a Labour man, they did this.
I think that we ought all of us, William, whether we are in the churches or not, whether we are Conservatives or not, maybe to put a little more emphasis on the spirit and a little less emphasis on words. Because if we get the spirit right, everything will follow.
But that didn't answer the question, with great respect. Should he have changed the words? The spirit in which they sang it.
I don't think he should have changed the words. I think he trivialised the whole process.
Christine Laird.
I have to say I'm amazed that people have the time to spend thinking about these kind of issues.
Right. Okay. And the answer to that is we don't, but just before we go, just have one last vote. Do you think they should change the words of the national anthem if it causes offence? Was he right to change the words of the national anthem? And on this happy note, which is, I think, pretty much thumbs down, 17% in favour and 69% saying no and 14% undecided. That's the message from Question Time to the Provost of Birmingham. The message from Bristol, where I thank our panel here very much and all of you in the audience who came here tonight Next week we're going to be on rather earlier, on Thursday next week at 10:30. We're going to be in London. Our guests are going to be Ian Lang, the President of the Board of Trade, Glenda Jackson, the Labour MP and former Oscar winner, Joe Brand, the comedian and writer, Sir Bernard Ingham, the former Chief Press Secretary to Number 10. So I hope you'll join us. 10:30 next Thursday. Until then, from all of us here in Bristol, good night.
Henry was a high flyer who thought he had it all.
And call my wife and tell her I can't make dinner.
But nobody's life comes with a guarantee.
Henry can't speak. His memory might be deeply affected.
So Henry has the chance to start again.
How did you learn to do that?
You taught me.
Harrison Ford and Annette Bening star in Regarding Henry, tomorrow at 10:20 on BBC One.